History tells you Frederick Douglass escaped slavery, but it doesn't tell you the secret. It doesn't tell you that before he could find freedom, he was first sold out by the one man he trusted with his life. What if the greatest obstacle to a man's freedom isn't the chains on his wrists, but the brother standing beside him?
The year is 1835. Frederick Douglass is not yet a legend. He is a boy of 17, but his soul is ancient. He carries the fresh scars, both physical and psychological, from his victorious battle with the infamous slave breaker, Edward Covey. That fight taught him a profound lesson. A master's power is an illusion built on the foundation of a slave's fear. And Frederick had stopped being afraid. He was now on the plantation of William Freeland, a man far less cruel than Covey. But this was its own kind of prison, a gilded cage. Here the chains were lighter, the food more plentiful. It was a place designed to make a man comfortable with his bondage, to dull the edge of his desire for freedom. For Frederick, this comfort was more dangerous than any whip. It was a lullaby meant to sing his spirit to sleep. But his spirit would not sleep. It was a wildfire, and it began to spread. He started a secret Sunday school, teaching his fellow slaves to read the Bible. But he wasn't just teaching them scripture. He was teaching them rebellion, one letter at a time. It was here he found his army. Henry and John Harris, two brothers bound by blood and a shared hatred for their condition. Charles Roberts, a man whose anger burned as hot as Frederick's. And then there was Sandy Jenkins.
Sandy was different. He was older, a free man's husband, and respected by all. He was a man of faith and folklore. When Frederick had been at his lowest point under Covey's tyranny, broken and ready to give up, it was Sandy who had found him. He'd given Frederick a peculiar root, claiming it had magical properties, that no white man would whip him while he carried it. It was, of course, a superstition, but for Frederick, it was a lifeline. It was a symbol of resistance, of a power the masters couldn't understand. It restored his confidence. In Frederick's eyes, Sandy was more than a friend. He was a spiritual guide. He was the wise elder, the steady hand. He was the one man Frederick believed would follow him into the very gates of hell. So on a dark, moonless night, in the secrecy of that cabin, Frederick unveiled the plan. It was terrifyingly bold. During the Easter holidays, a time of distraction and celebration for the masters, they would acquire a large canoe. Under the cover of darkness, they would slip into the vast, treacherous waters of the Chesapeake Bay. From there, they would paddle for 2 days, non-stop, heading north until they reached the head of the bay and crossed into the free state of Pennsylvania. Frederick, with his precious stolen literacy, had even forged travel passes for them all, claiming they had their master's permission to travel to Baltimore. Each pass was a lie, each signature an act of war. He explained the risks, the unpredictable storms on the bay that could swallow their canoe whole, the slave patrols that haunted the waterways like sharks, the exhaustion, the hunger, the constant gnawing fear of capture. Capture didn't just mean a whipping, it meant being sold down the river, sold to the sugar plantations of the Deep South, a death sentence from which no one returned.
He laid it all bare, and one by one they agreed. They chose the risk of a watery grave over the certainty of a life in chains. That night, they swore an oath, not in words, but in a silent, powerful pressing of hands. It was a pact sealed in desperation and hope.
As Frederick looked at the faces around him, illuminated by that single defiant flame, he felt a sense of destiny. They were invincible, united, unbreakable. But a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And in the shadows of that cabin, one link was already beginning to rust.
The weeks leading up to Easter were a masterclass in deception. By day, they were obedient slaves, working the fields with a false placidity. By night, they were revolutionaries, stockpiling dried fish and hard bread, studying Frederick's hand-drawn map until they knew every inlet and river bend by heart. The secret lived between them, a fragile, beautiful thing. It made them walk taller. It put a light in their eyes that hadn't been there before. But light casts a shadow, and their master, William Freeland, was a man who noticed shadows. He wasn't a monster like Covey. He was worse. He was intelligent. He understood that the most effective chains are not made of iron, but of love and fear. He saw the new confidence in his slaves, and he traced it back to its source, Frederick. But he didn't confront Frederick. He went for the man he perceived as the weakest link, the man with the most to lose.
We don't know the exact words that were said. Frederick himself could only guess, but we can imagine the scene. Freeland wouldn't have shouted or threatened. He would have been quiet, paternal even. "Sandy," he might have said, his voice laced with false concern, "you're a good man. You have a wife. You have children. They are safe here. They are cared for. Do you know what happens to the family of a runaway?" He would have let the question hang in the air, the poison slowly seeping in. "They are sold, Sandy. A wife to one master, a child to another, torn apart. You would never see them again. This plan of Frederick's, it's a boy's dream, a foolish, dangerous dream. A real man doesn't chase dreams. A real man protects his family." He wasn't offering a choice between slavery and freedom. He was offering a choice between his friends' lives and his children's faces. The seed was planted, and in the fertile ground of Sandy's fear, it began to grow. The other men saw a change in him. He grew quiet, distant. His laughter no longer reached his eyes. When Frederick spoke of their future in the north, Sandy would just stare at the ground, his jaw tight. It was the subtle poison of doubt, visible only to those who dared to look. But they were all so blinded by the light of their own hope, they missed the darkness growing in their midst.
The night before their departure, the tension in the cabin was a physical presence. It was the Last Supper. They barely spoke. What was there to say? Everything was about to change, one way or another. As the others finally drifted into a restless sleep, Sandy remained awake. He was a man on a precipice, staring into two different abysses. In one, he saw the faces of his friends, betrayed. In the other, he saw the face of his child, sold on an auction block. He rose from his cot, a ghost in the darkness, and with a quietness that betrayed the storm raging inside him, he walked out of the cabin and into the night. The next morning, the air was cold and damp with mist. It was perfect. The world was asleep. Frederick, Henry, John, and Charles made their way to the river. Sandy was missing, but they weren't worried. The plan was for him to meet them at the canoe. As they cleared the last line of trees and the river came into view, Frederick felt his heart pound with a wild, triumphant rhythm. They had made it. They were almost...
The world went silent. The shouts, the guns, the pounding of my own heart, it all faded away.
There was only Sandy, his face hidden, his posture broken. It didn't make sense. My mind was scrambling, trying to find an explanation. Was he captured first, forced to lead them here? But then I saw it. He wasn't in chains. He was standing with them. And the truth, a thing of pure black horror, crashed down on me. The plan wasn't discovered. It was sold.
There are wounds that never heal. In the cold, damp darkness of that jail cell, the other men raged. They cursed Sandy's name. They cursed their master. They cursed God. But Frederick was silent. He was somewhere else entirely. He was replaying every moment, every shared look, every promise. He was dissecting the anatomy of a betrayal, trying to find the exact moment the poison had entered his friend's heart. The pain was immense, but underneath it, something else was being born, a cold, hard clarity. They spent a week in that hell, convinced each sunrise would be their last before the long journey south. But then, a strange reprieve. Their master, Freeland, perhaps fearing the local reputation of having a full-blown slave insurrection on his hands, decided against selling them. The others were released back to the plantation. But Frederick was different. He was the leader, the source of the infection. He was sent away, back to Baltimore, to be broken by the brutal labor of the shipyards. It was meant to be a final crushing punishment. It would become his salvation. The boy who dreamed of a shared freedom died in that jail cell. In his place, a man was forged, not in fire, but in ice. The betrayal cauterized his youthful idealism, leaving behind a scar that would become his armor. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. Hope was a secret to be guarded, not a banner to be shared. He learned the most brutal lesson of his life. In the fight for freedom, the greatest liability is your dependence on another man's courage. He arrived in Baltimore a changed man. The vibrant, charismatic youth who once traded bread for words was gone. In his place was a silent, watchful observer. He worked in the shipyards, his muscles hardening, but it was his mind that was truly being sharpened. He learned the ways of the city, the flow of money, the subtle dance of power between black and white, free and enslaved. He spoke to few, trusting no one. He was a solitary operative, gathering intelligence for a war only he knew he was still fighting.
For 2 years he planned. He saved every spare cent. He studied the train schedules. He observed the sailors, learning their mannerisms, their way of speaking. He was building his next escape, not on a foundation of shared hope, but on a bedrock of cold, hard logic. This time, there would be no team, no oath, no one to trust, and therefore, no one to betray him. He secured the papers of a free black sailor, a tremendous risk, and chose his moment. On September 3, 1838, he walked away from the shipyard, not looking back. He boarded a train heading north. This was the final test. Every click of the wheels on the track was a countdown, every stop a potential end. But this time, his fate was in his hands alone. 24 hours later, he stepped off that train in New York City. He was a fugitive, he was penniless, he was alone, but he was free. The betrayal had nearly destroyed him. It had cost him his innocence and his faith in his fellow man. But it had given him something in return. The ice-cold resolve that would turn a runaway slave into a global icon. He had to be broken by a friend to finally learn how to stand alone. And it was by standing alone that he changed the world. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.